All right. So I know we talked a little bit before, but like, can you like introduce yourself a little bit for the audience?
Of course, yeah. So first, thank you for inviting me on your show. I always appreciate conversations like this, and I hope to provide something valuable for your listeners. So my name is Shaun Astorga. I'm a board certified physical therapist, and I co-own a PT practice in northern New Jersey called Amp Performance Rehab. We work with a pretty active population of people. They're pretty much like myself, former high school, college athlete, still likes to get after it, even though we're getting a little older. We also work with a lot of high school, college pro athletes as well. I know we just spoke about this as well. I own a continuing education company called AMP Education, which is how most people on social media know me. So our flagship program, it's called AMP Blueprint, and that is a mentorship program where we help other clinicians, coaches just gain more confidence in their approach to working with clients from both a movement standpoint, but also a communication standpoint. I think that's like the high level overview.
Nice, nice. So the first question or the first topic I wanted to talk about today is actually like, is a few weeks ago you shared a post and you talk about like ISA angle
Mhm.
and think the example you gave is John Morant. So Uh, can you kind of like walk me through that? Like, how exactly did ISA angle influence like athletic performance?
Yeah, sure. And the post you're specifically talking about is related to the ISA angle, but also the relationship between the circumference of the rib cage and the pelvis. So there's like it's like layers of the same thing, I guess we'll say. But so your ISA, right, like you said, the angle, right? So it's the angle that is formed by your lower ribs. They all come together and they meet at the sternum. And this area is more mobile than any other part of the rib cage. You have your abs, they attach to your lower ribs. They help you control your center of mass, your abdominal content. So things like your organs, connective tissue in there, the membranes that surround your organs, fluid, all that kind of stuff. So this area is of interest because a lot of the movement things that like you and I see when we are working with clients. It has to do with the wide variety of options that are available that could happen at this area due to like how the person, we call it like manages their guts, but like essentially like the body's going to compensate somewhere, and a lot of it can happen at the like the core, if you will. This is my bias, but the way that I don't know if you're familiar with Bill Hartman, but the way that Bill Hartman talks about the ISA and he has coined like his helical angle archetypes for however long he's been talking about that stuff. But it makes the most sense to me when we're talking about movement and like the relevance of the ISA. I don't know how much more you want me to go in depth on that, but uh, like essentially the ISA, right? It's someone's baseline structure is how we think about it. So it defines their structure and some of their movement tendencies. It's not a rigid label, and it's not like there's an ideal angle that this angle is. It's just like the angle is what it is for the person, and it's a data point, and it's gonna help me as the clinician or you as the coach maybe set expectations for how the person is going to perform like a variety of different movement tasks. It gets relevant, in my opinion. It doesn't really have anything to do with like this person's a narrow ISA, they should do this squatting variation. Like I don't think that's very useful, but it's really about understanding the person's center of mass, where it lies, whether it's inside or outside of their base of support. And when necessary, like we might have to like if the ISA is restricted, for example, and the person doesn't have motion capabilities in their joints, like restoring them to some degree is going to be useful. And that comes from getting the ISA to become more dynamic or start moving again. Um, what else? So I also think from like it's important to understand a person's structural bias because it influences their recovery strategies and what you might give a person to maybe work on after a hard training session, or in my case, where pain is an issue and we're trying to restore pain-free movement options in the person. It's useful to appreciate their ISA because you can reverse engineer the situation a little bit. And this is because the trajectory of a person's movement from a movement standpoint, it's pretty predictable based on their ISA, at least as I understand it.
Nice, nice, nice. So, um, I remember at that post you also mentioned that or is someone else mentioned this that uh there's a wide ISA angle and a short, no, narrow wide
Mhm.
ISA angle, and like different, like depends on it wide or narrow. Like the athlete is more like muscle based or more elastic. Is
Mhm.
that a thing or like
Yeah, yeah, I got what you're saying. So this is going back to like Bill Hartman and his helical archetypes, and like it's not really, I will say it's not my place to teach his stuff. He has like a great network of it's a UHP network, and he has a program called the Intensive that I've been involved with since we'll say like 2019-ish timeframe or so. But yeah, yeah. So there's different qualities based that you would expect a person to exhibit based on their angle. So you mentioned wide and a narrow, right? So narrow, think like very small, so like 45, 60 degrees, something like that. Wide is very clear. It's like 115, 120 degrees plus, whatever. So he talks a lot about helical angles, and I think the easiest way to appreciate this is like if you have the angle of your rib cage and you just bring your arms up on it, like a narrow is going to have like very tight looking turns, and a wide is going to have like wider looking turns. There's also implications for whether they're more like force biased versus velocity biased. And then you're going to have situations where people can be more muscular dominant or more like connective tissue or elastic, right? In that sense, partly has to do with the angle itself, like the archetype, but then there's also like layers you add onto it. So, for example, one thing that we look at is the relationship between the circumference of the rib cage. This is like super nerdy, man, but like the
it's
circumference of
awesome.
the
It's awesome.
of the rib cage relative to the circumference of the pelvis. And you'll see these like, if you want like examples, you can have like a very wide shaped, forget the angle. You can have like a very wide circumference rib cage and a very wide circumference pelvis. So it's like a cylinder. This would be like Eddie Hall or like someone who like is like a typical like super strong force producer, power lifter type body type versus someone like you mentioned earlier in that post I made with John Morant, right, where their pelvis is narrower or higher pressure, right, than their rib cage. So these people tend to be very elastic in nature, so they can like they touch the ground and like they look like they're gonna just fly off. They can jump really high, all that type of stuff.
So, uh, I guess I want to like I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into it. Like, so why does people say like, is it narrow ISA angle or more like speed bias or elastic wide ISA is more like force bias? Am I,
You're good.
yeah. Why is that?
Yeah, so the structure is going to dictate a lot of these things. So, for example, um, a narrow ISA individual, they're going to have more bias towards external rotation. So it's hard without visuals here, but if you think of like the pelvis is almost like a flower, so it's very like ER shapes. So you're going to have a sacrum that's counter-nutated. You're going to have a back that is more counter-nutated. So when you have that situation, right, you're going to have more eccentric muscle orientation compared to like a wide is going to have more concentric muscle orientation in different parts of their body. So like the biggest thing is, and I know you mentioned like talking about like jumping and like lateral movement and all that kind of stuff, is like when we look at like the pelvic floor, for example. So the anterior versus posterior pelvic floor is where you see a lot of these differences. So like in a narrow, their anterior pelvic floor is going to be more eccentrically oriented, so more descended. So it means, right? For example, they're going to have a harder time like grinding out reps in the bottom of a squat. Like it's harder for them to right concentrically orient their musculature and redirect forces. Versus a narrow, the opposite, or oh, sorry, a wide, the opposite is true. They're going to be more concentric in the anterior pelvic floor. So they're going to be a little bit more biased towards those type being better at those types of activities. Doesn't mean like me as a narrow, I can't squat and get strong squatting. It just means like my baseline structure is maybe suited for other things better compared to someone else with a different structure. That's all it means. It's not like you're like this person can never do these activities because their pelvic floor is anterior pelvic floor is descended, doesn't mean that.
So, mm, that lead me to another question.
Mhm.
This question is not on the list. So all the time, like in the strength and conditioning world, people talk about force velocity profiling.
Mhm.
And we know that, like you mentioned, that either it's ISA angle, either it's uh they live in certain like gait cycle or whatever it is. Like athlete have their natural bias to how they move.
Mhm.
So what are your thoughts on like, man, I don't want to put you in a situation like this, but so anyway, what are your thoughts on like force velocity profiling and trying to hit the weakest point?
Yeah, that's great. So what are the examples they give for like someone who's force dominant and like velocity biased?
So like if we do use 1080 to do a deceleration test,
Hmm.
linear deceleration, if this athlete is like can like brake on very high force but low velocity versus an athlete can brake like very high velocity but low force. And if and like we think I think we should train this
Hmm.
high force athlete, low force, high velocity. And
Yep.
this athlete with high velocity, low force, we should train him high force, low velocity. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, yeah. No, no, I got you. Yeah, I'm with you. So what I was getting at is, right, they talk about like a gorilla and a kangaroo or like
Yep,
the tip.
yep,
Yeah,
yep.
right. This is like very similar in thought process. That's what I was really getting at, the kangaroo and the gorilla. So yeah, so we talk a lot about like quote unquote managing their superpowers. So like how much exposure do we need to keep them doing what they're doing right at a high level and pushing the upper limit, but also it's like keeping them, and I'm going to use this word loosely, but like keeping them healthy. And I think that comes from what you're describing is we have to you train the curve, right? So if a person who is like naturally good at like a lot of overcoming activities and generating, high velocities, like it benefits them to what? To like get stronger, right? And do stuff on the other end of the spectrum. Yeah, and like I think for us as coaches and me as a PT, um, it's balancing that for the person and their goals. So yeah, 100%. It's a little different for me as a PT because I come in when people have gone too far, in one direction.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
like but like from a conceptual standpoint, I would say it's the same. We're always kind of playing that curve and
yep.
at different phases in a person's like if they're training for something, for example. I look at myself like I'm a distance, runner. So if I'm like peaking for a half, my training is going to look a little bit different than right now where I'm like in my off season. So I kind of think about it like that.
Nice, nice,
So I
nice.
agree. Long-winded way of saying, yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, yeah. So, for besides the eyes angle, another thing, like you mentioned, kind of mentioned this is gut. And this kind of like confuses me is uh let's say if we do a vertical jump, how exactly does the gut like moves or I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, like what role does it play kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but yeah, so like when I think of like a vertical jump, for example, if we take the landing out of it, you have right eccentric or loading component, and then you have the
Yep.
concentric, right?
Yep.
So you have eccentric energy is stored and then concentric energy released and you jump and all that kind of stuff. So the way I think about it is the eccentric component, it requires that you can access or load your hips. So you need your posterior outlet, so the area between like your sacrum and your ischial tuberosities, right? There needs to be some degree of space for that to happen efficiently. So this requires like your lower glutes, deep hip external rotators, they need to be able to eccentrically load. Your connective tissue on the back of your pelvis, it needs to be able to yield or relax or give way so that you can like get into the position. And then you quickly transition out of it, right? So the guts, they're an internal force that your body also has to manage. And during the eccentric phase, you're moving, hopefully, if you're trying to do this quickly, right, you're moving faster than gravity. So there's going to be a period where your guts are suspended in air for it's a short period of time, but they're suspended. So your pelvis drops and then the guts drop versus like everything moving simultaneously. And that's where it comes in, right? Because now we're talking about like the pelvic floor's ability to now catch the guts at a high speed. Well, get into a position, catch the guts, and then send everything upwards. So if you have someone who can't load into their hip well and maybe has like a bias towards eccentric anterior pelvic floor, like we mentioned with like narrow individuals, they're probably gonna have a harder time redirecting those forces and maximizing output in a vertical. You'll see like common examples of things you'll see is like they'll get into the bottom position and they almost have to like double clutch. Like that would be an example. That's how I visualize it is that their guts are hitting and they can't overcome it. So then it's like a second set they have to quickly produce force again. So that's kind of how I think about it from a vertical standpoint.
So why why are people like talking about like gut and how like can we kind of like influence it or like can we change it or how can we use it to help our training?
Yeah, beautiful question, man. Yeah, and one thing I will say too, and I just want to add this in. I don't know if it's a necessary caveat, but there could be a number of reasons why a person can't load into a like a counter movement jump, for example, right? Like I don't want to paint this picture that it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, it could be a new activity for them and they're just learning it, and motor learning is going to come with rigidity because it's like a high cognitive demand. I appreciate all of that. I appreciate the person could just be like not strong enough to do it. Like all that stuff aside, if we're talking just strictly the gut component. So I always just like to say that because otherwise people are like, this guy's an idiot. It's like, but that all gets compounded on their underlying structure anyway. So where does this come in from a training standpoint? So we need to help set the person up for success, right? This is no different than anything we do in a gym. So where I might consider is if the person, say for example, they have a hard time accessing like the counter movement part does not look good, and they have like massive like I don't know knee valgus, they feel it in their back, whatever it is, like getting their pelvic floor connective tissue to be a little bit more overcoming, allowing them to yield to get into the position quicker and then quickly transition force is where I go. So what might I do in like a rehab or gym setting? I might use something like a box squat, right? Where I can set the height of the box at a position that they can control, and we're now able to put them in good positions to train force production within their base of support. So you can train them to load into their hips using the box as assistant. So right when they hit the box, they're coming right off of it. So it's almost like you're how would I say this? Like you're assisting their anterior pelvic floor to concentrically contract, right? So that they can. It's a little bit easier in the bottom position. You can use reverse bands for the same thing. You can also use it for someone who has a hard time uh, getting into the bottom position. So if you have them sit on the box for a little bit, energy is going to dissipate. It's like what power lifters do, right? Energy dissipates a little bit, and then they can yield into the position, and then now we're generating force. Like that would be like a strength application of it. We use a lot of like oscillatory, like split squats, oscillatory squats, a lot of like cleans, connected kettlebell cleans, reverse lunge cleans, like all that type of stuff. We find it super useful because you're training the ability of the person to like quickly get in and out of position, so you can make their like we'll say like keep talking about anterior pelvic floor, but you can make the connective tissue a little bit more overcoming, and the quick drop where you're unweighting their pelvic floor lets them get into the position a little bit easier. And the motions with these a lot of the oscillatory stuff, you can make it very small, like low amplitude, or you could do something like a kettlebell clean where you're like literally cleaning and then sitting into the bottom like 90 degrees or whatever. So they're like that's from like a training application standpoint how I kind of think about things. It's always what's the end goal, and are the exercises and the stuff we're doing, like you hit it right, the force velocity curve, like we got to hit stuff on all of that. It's just where are they in their in season, out of season, whatever. So it's kind of how I think about things.
Nice, nice. So we talk about vertical side of the thing. How about lateral movement? How does the gut like affect? lateral movement.
Yeah, so it's vertical, I think is easy, a good starting point because it's pretty much bilateral is how we think about it, right? So up and down. Lateral is the same. It's except you're transitioning from one side to the other. So like when we talk about in my world, we talk about like different pelvis shapes, for example. So you need to like ER on one side or push out of the cut on one side to load into the cut on the other side, right? So it's the same thing. So it's do you have the ability when you're pushing out of a cut, for example, you need to redirect all your internal forces. So if we say like go back to the vertical for a second, when you go into the counter movement, guts are unweighted, right? When I go load into a cut, there's a period of unweighting. So then I have to catch the guts on that side that is loading and then redirect them in the opposite direction. So it's the same thing, except now instead of vertical, we're going to, opposite side of the body. Yeah.
Nice, nice. So, because before this, I read some like article about like people talk about gut and vertical jump. And I was like, is it the whole concept kind of like inertia or like momentum?
Yeah.
I was kind of confused, but it looks like it, right?
Yeah, 100%. It is like especially in training, like I think we often think about like the external load. This is just like it's in your body, like literally,
Internal.
it's like this
Yeah.
massive amount of weight that is just there, Yeah, and it moves, so it's like attached, like they're all like in some type of membrane, like you have your pleura, like fluid-filled sac, so there's like fluid involved in this situation too. And a useful visual, you might see it on social media, right? Is like people when they're using water bags like I think it's a very good visual because like when you see like a water bag swing, like the water, right? What happens is it gets suspended in the top and then it comes back down. So like those little delays, I think, are useful visuals to kind of get an idea. If you watch people in real time, like their shirt, so it's like when like when they go to like load into a cut and their shirt goes that direction. Like to me, that's like the like what's happening internally, just to different degrees. I don't
Whoa,
know. That's
that just gave me another like kind of gave me another view about like all those like aqua ball stuff. Yeah. Besides
yeah.
just perturbation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we use them in that way. We like in this like to make it like flowy, like the rhythm of it is like I know flowy and like water is corny, but like like the rhythm of it is very useful for people and especially like when you think about like athletic movement, we're talking about right coordination and rhythm and all those types of things. And where a lot of like your like typical sports performance type stuff is thought of like it's just very high output all the time, but it's really like your ability to control your body, right? If you're athletic, like you're not going to take that away from someone. But like getting that like coordination from like something like an aqua bag, like I wouldn't do like their whole program is based on aqua bag training, but like if we're talking about like incorporating it with other stuff, like it makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm. All right. Before I jump into the another topic like scoliosis, which I really want to talk about, but before I we dive into like scoliosis, I kind of want to put like everything we talked about until now, kind of put it together. So, like you mentioned that uh shit, where should I start?
I was gonna say, good luck, man. Yeah, we've kind
Yeah, where should I start?
of
All right, let's start with this. So, wide assay angle and narrow assay angle. How the like how does that correlate with the pelvic shape?
Great question. Yeah. So your wide ISA is going to have more of like an internal rotation bias to their structure. So they're going to have like a increased like lordotic curve, more of like a nutated like flex forward kind of position of their sacrum and their ilia, right? Their posterior outlet is going to be relatively just more open. That's so they're going to have like people will say they have more like access to internal
More
rotation,
into
yeah, more access to internal rotation and they have like less access to external rotation. So flip it for uh, a narrow. So their posterior outlet is going to be closed, their acetabulum, right? They're going in the opposite direction. So everything is going to be external rotation biased. We didn't talk about this, but when people start to lose joint motion, whether it's from like training adaptations or for whatever reason, like you get like a reduction of motion in the system throughout, but you also get like an external rotation kind of pull at like say we're talking about pelvis, so your acetabulum, for example. It's easy to see in people like shoulder, like you ever see someone like they say they have like shoulder impingement symptoms. It's like in the front of their body when they're flexing their arm, it hurts, but then they bring it to the side and it feels better and they can clear more motion. That's what we're talking about, like the orientation change in their joints. Same thing with a squat. It's like if you try to narrow squat someone with their knees straight forward, pinches in their hip, tighten their low back, whatever, and you bring their feet out wider. It's because they're everything is ER'd, so everything is externally rotated in that situation. So that would be like how pelvic underlying structure kind of influences things, and then you layer on, person's story essentially, like what they've kind of done.
Nice. And so, uh, and well, this is hard. This is hard summary. So then, how does like the ER bias or IR bias pelvis affect the gut?
Yeah, great question. So the person's like diaphragm shape and pelvic floor, right? Like we'll say like muscular orientation is going to be the biggest thing. So if you have like a wide ISA individual, their uh, anterior pelvic floor musculature is going to be more concentrically biased, so like tight, if you will, and their posterior outlet is going to be more open. They're more of a lordotic curve, so you're going to tend to see like uh, I don't know. I think of like those like dudes with those giant abs, like that are just like look like their stomach's bulging a little bit. Like that's kind of like the typical presentation there. So for like a narrow, it would be more of a bias towards like a likely like a sway back orientation. So like they're gonna have like a tight lower butt, like squeezing, and their organs are pushed down and forward. That would be like the most common things that you're gonna probably see. There's gonna be you can have like biases to one side and all that kind of stuff, which are present in all of us. But just like a general way to think about it would be that.
So, uh, does that mean like narrow ISA angle is easier to like? Bec I'm trying to connect the
Hmm.
dots.
Yeah, yeah.
So, it does that mean like narrow ISA angle? Yeah, and narrow ISA angle is easier to like use the gut to help them perform for vertical
Di-
movement and lateral movement.
different strategies, different strategy. It's just they're gonna. This is the person, and this is their structure. Like it might just influence what like how they do it. That's it. That's how I think about it. So like if a person's got to get better at vertical jumping, it doesn't matter if they're a narrow or a wide. Like one's gonna. It's just like how does that influence the way that they're performing it is the way I think about it. Like a general framework that I think is useful. This is something that his name's Encore, who helps out with the our mentorship program, right? Like step one is going to be opening the posterior outlet. So can they load into the hip? Step two is how do we pressurize? So like core stuff, if you will. How do we redirect their center of mass backwards, like that kind of stuff? The stack position you might see people talk about is like pressurizing, and then how do we build endurance with using that shape? That's like the general kind of framework that we follow. Regardless of ISA, man, the ISA just gives you the structure. Like that's just literally what their structure does, and the movement, typical movement compensation. So it's very predictable. Like someone who's like very on the wide end of the spectrum, they're going to perform a lot of the same movements like everyone else who's on that end of the spectrum. It's just movement tendencies. So
Nice.
I wrap it up by saying I wouldn't get too caught up in that, like kind of trust what you're seeing, right? Like if you're seeing a person and their center of mass, they look like kind of like a baby learning to walk. Like what do we need to do is like we got to get their center of mass, back in space and teach them how to produce force in that position. Like that's the general way I think about it.
Nice, nice. I'm sorry, I kind of like, man, I feel like I'm kind of like a newbie here. But it
No,
was awesome.
these are great questions, man. And this is like it's like a different way of viewing things we already
Yeah,
know, right? Like I always tell people it's like especially if like learning stuff like this for the new time, like for the first time, like don't throw everything you out out that you know. It's like you're better off like trying to make connections to what you already know, right? Like we did in the beginning when you're like the force velocity curve. Like that's what we're talking about. Like people are just structurally biased. You're a gorilla, you're a kangaroo, you're somewhere in the middle, like whatever. And then you got to just figure out the qualities that they need. Same
Yeah,
with ISA, right? That's your underlying structure. And then you have chronic adaptations, right? Like you have all that stuff that's also gonna play a role.
yeah, cause I heard Bill Hartman talk a lot. I think I basically listened to every podcast he did. I read almost every article he write. Almost not gonna say every, but probably almost.
You put some
And
time in.
yeah, and like I mentioned, like there are other guys like have biomechanics course I did, but the way you kind of explain it really helped me understand it because I was like so confused. What exactly are those stuff? But you kind of just connect the dots. So that was awesome. That was awesome.
I appreciate that. Yeah, man. It's a lot of it is trial and error on my part, and it's I tell people all the time, like it is not fair to compare ourselves to someone who has 40 years of experience and who literally has built out their own framework to think about things, right? Like we can't do that. It's not fair. We're going to set ourselves up for failure. So the best that we can do is appreciate where we're at and then add information to it and then build out our own kind of version, that's useful for us. Some of the stuff that I talk about, like I appreciate that it might not be useful for a strength coach. Like I'm a physical therapist. I work with people in pain, right? So when people are coming to me, like obviously trainers do in the sense that like no one's feeling good all the time. But like I have people who like these are chronic issues that are going on and like we need to like reevaluate this entire situation. So like I might use more passive modalities in the short term. I might resort on like to a breathing drill where a trainer could be like, I don't even, why would I use a breathing drill? I'm like training this person, right? So it's just really like the application of things and understanding the person and what you think is best for them as the professional.
Nice, nice. I love it. I love it. All right, I'm gonna jump in the next one. So the reason I am so sorry, fascinated about like scoliosis is because uh, I'm a sprinter.
Mhm.
I train sprinter. I train sprinter, basketball player, all types of athlete. But so when I was in Taiwan, I always had low back pain, groin pain, adductor pain. I was like, and I go to like different physical therapists, and finally like my low back pain is like gone, but like adductor pain, groin pain is just still there. And every time I sprint, I lift, it just bothered me. Like
Mhm.
bothers me a lot. And I go to like different physical therapists just until like I met until like no one actually look at like my spine.
Mhm.
Most of them do like SFMA, FMS, or like whatever system it is until I met a physical therapist. And the first thing he did is like check my scoliosis and said,
Mhm.
"Oh, you got scoliosis." And we tried to do some breathing drills to help, and then it was all gone. No
That's
pain
great.
ever. No pain ever. And I got more powerful. I lift heavier. I sprint way faster.
That's great.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Send me to this guy. Who is it?
So, um, I want to know like your thoughts on like scoliosis.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad you had that outcome. That's really that's awesome to hear, man. Especially when stuff goes on for a long time and you get a quick change like that. That's really great. Yeah, my thoughts on scoliosis. Well, what I'll say is that it's present in all of us, right? To some degree. Our body is naturally asymmetrical. And when you hear people, especially in my world, talk about like managing what we talked about earlier, managing internal forces, right? That's part of it is the asymmetrical component of things. That doesn't mean we have to do like crazy exercises, but just like it is a thing. And what we do on our right might look a little different than our left and how they load and all that kind of stuff. So that's always something that I have in mind when I'm working with a person. And when pain is present, it means we have less of a trainable window available for that person for that time. And then our goal is what is to increase the trainable menu for them. So when it comes to scoliosis, like whether it's a problem for someone or not, I mean, it's definitely going to influence how you move. You have a right different side to side, and if you have an S curve like versus like C curve, like all that kind of stuff is going to influence things. But it kind of goes back to what we talked about before: is understanding how what the person's trying to do and what their goals are, and how much of an influence like is it? I know it's like a very general answer. Um, for some people, like there's like a right, you could have a functional versus like structural scoliosis. So the functional could just be, I shouldn't say just, but the functional could be your body's natural asymmetries are amplified because of whatever reason, and now you have pain on one side versus the other, right? So it's like then we might have to offset it versus structural, where like this is just your body's structure, we got to use it as the constraint. So I don't know if I have a really like I don't know if there's like a blueprint I can lay out, or a framework, but it's kind of the same how I view things. It's like understanding the person, their structure, and what it tells me about what they're trying to do, and then we put a plan in place and see what happens. Is generally how I approach it. Yeah,
Nice, nice.
like I wouldn't say like scoliosis means you're going to have pain. Like I would never make that conclusion. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, of course.
yeah.
So, so I guess my next question would be like, mm, let's say if a person like me, a sprinter, love to lift heavy,
Mhm.
and definitely like not really fast athlete. Uh, at what point you're gonna go to check if it's scoliosis or not? Is it because of the scoliosis?
I don't even know how I would make that determination. Yeah, what I would look at. So like if you came to me and you're like, Shaun, my right adductor and low back hurt, what I'm going to do is watch you do the things that hurt. I'm going to watch you sprint. I'm going to watch you lift. I'm going to watch unloaded like kind of movement screens because they tell me about the motion you have available. So like usually I'll use a body weight squat, like a toe touch, some type of rotation, seated, standing, whatever. Um, and I'll probably look at table tests, so joint measures. Like, what does your hip rotation tell me? What does your shoulder rotation tell me? Cervical, all that kind of stuff. Because what that will do is give me an idea of, uh, yes, the range of motion that you have available in your body, but also like where your center of mass is relative to your base of support. So for a lot of people, scoliosis or not, it's like when we start to lose, right, our center of mass starts to get, I mean, you see it in me, like my center of mass is like way over my right side. Like this is like people who train, it's going to happen. Like it naturally is to some degree, and whether it's relevant or not, who knows, right? Like it's like how do we start bringing their center of mass within their base of support a little bit? So how do we uh, create expansion, right? How do we restore joint motion and all that kind of stuff? So I don't know if I necessarily would come back to like this is a scoliosis. It's more like what is the joint motion and how the person moves tells me. I don't know if that helps answer the question or not, but
Yeah, yeah, sure,
yeah,
sure, sure.
yeah,
Cause like I remember like uh after I go there, like last summer, I purposely go back and ask them for like make like let me intern there to
yeah.
learn how to like assess scoliosis and like want to learn everything about it. It's actually just like the same you mentioned. Like
Yeah, yeah.
toe, yeah, toe touch, rotation, yeah, like just how the spine works. Just like how
Yeah.
like just you like the stuff you mentioned.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that. Like, people like will make fun of me, like they think I'm joking. But when I say like when like what is like the simplest way to think about it, it's like your ISA. If your ISA doesn't move, what do you do? Like figure out how to make it move. Like if your shoulder doesn't externally rotate, what do you do? It's like let's figure out how to make it externally. It's like the joints are designed to do something, right? Like we don't need like full motion to function and not feel great. But like if it's not doing something we need it to do and it's restrictive, like the easiest thing is like, huh, interesting. What if I just give it a little more motion and then give it some capacity, right? Like that's the simplest thing, you know?
Nice, nice, nice.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep asking you another question. This morning when I wake up, I saw you share a post about like I think people talk about what is it? SI joint pain. So, uh, this is also a huge one. Sorry, my
Hmm.
question is also like broad, huge, vague.
That's okay. Yeah.
But 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 what exactly like or not what exactly? Like what are like the common causes of like SI joint pain?
Yeah, that would be very hard to to identify. What I can tell you is, I think this is again, this is bias. This is my opinion. I think that a common thing in especially like the physical therapy clinician kind of world is to completely write off the SI joint motion because it's so minimal. And I think that the SI joint plays a very important role in, I don't think it does, in force transfer, right? Like it's like how your force goes up from your lower to your upper body. And I appreciate that, like, I can't identify how much motion is happening when a person's walking or squatting or all that kind of stuff. But that's where the joint motion becomes useful. Like if a person can't internally rotate, their ilia can't internally rotate to any degree, right? So if a person can is restricted in external rotation, that little bit of motion at the sacrum does not exist, right? So like it's not unrealistic for me to like it's not like a crazy conclusion to come to in my opinion that like there is some kind of influence from that, right, on the SI joint, for example. I think there's also it's interesting that when you look at where like lumbar herniations happen, it's right where L4, L5, L5, S1. So it's like you have a lack of motion in one area and it gets taken up for another. I'm not saying that SI joint movement's the cause, like, I don't know, chronic fatigue, right? Under recovered, like all those things are going to influence the body, right? Pain is it's a multifactorial thing. But when we're looking strictly from a movement standpoint, like we can't just write off the freaking joint, man. Like that's my opinion, you know, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know where it comes from. Yeah, is my like it
Uh,
could be
uh,
a lot of things, right? You could have a
yeah.
person, dude, like this is a crazy like this. I've told this story, you know, a few times. Is we had a person with this is neck pain, not SI joint pain, but like she would have neck pain and chronic migraines, and it turned out like we would get the movement system moving, we'd free up all her motion on a table, get her training, and then 2 weeks later it would come back cyclical, and it turned out she had a gluten allergy. Yeah, we just were like, this is weird because like you get better, get better, get better, and then it gets worse. Get better, get better. And she's like, yeah, every second Tuesday, like every other Tuesday, I do like wine and cheese night with my friends, and we eat like crackers, and then I get a migraine for 3 days or whatever after. And it's like, oh wow, we should probably look into that, you know? And so it's like, you know, I'm like, wow, I should have, you know, I could have taken a better history on this person, maybe. I don't know, maybe understood the components of pain. So we just don't know, right? There's always going to be those factors. But for us, like I think one, being open to that there's a lot of things that can happen. But two, we need a systematic way to evaluate a person. And that goes with the interview and subjective, and it goes with the movement component of things. And I just always appreciate like I'm probably wrong in things that I'm doing, but it's the best that I can do right now. That's just literally how I think about
Nice.
things so that I'm not too
Nice.
hard on myself and there's always opportunity to learn more and grow and get better.
Nice. Last
Like
thing.
you, just like you did with the guy who helped you. You're like, let me come shadow and learn from you, right? That's the
That
same
was
thing.
crazy. That
You're
that
just
was
like, I don't know something, and this helped me. I'm gonna learn it. Like that's how I approach things too, man.
that was crazy.
Yeah.
All right, last thing before I let you go. Um, we talk about IS angle, we talk about gut, we talk about scoliosis, pelvis, and like every topic we talk about, like you always mention that the center, like where is the body center mass? Is it in front of us? Is it outside of us? Like, why is that so important?
Yeah, yeah. So when you're, we'll go bilateral first. So when your center of mass is pushed forward, so if you were to like stand up and you lock out your knees and like squeeze your glutes, for example, you're going to have a sway forward in your center of mass. So what this does is it starts to take away joint motion. It's just you're literally changing orientation of joints. So when your center of mass is forward, you're going to lose external rotation for sure. And the further forward you are, if you will, the more you're going to lose internal rotation because muscles have to squeeze to keep your body upright, right? So if you just did it now, you stood up, lock your knees out, squeeze your butt, you're going to start feel your body sway forward. Your feet are going to claw into the ground. You're going to adductors are going to start squeezing. That's all like compression, right? So that's why we care about it from that perspective. And then when you bring it back to the narrow and the wide, they have differences side to side, like how they're like just the way your organs sit, right? And your motion that you have available to start. So you're going to see differences in how they start to lose motion. Like that's the most important thing. People get mad when I say this. I'll say 99.9% of people they lose motion to the right, over and to the right. In some like how they get there is different, but it is in that direction, it would seem. So like just appreciating the structure from that perspective as well helps kind of reverse engineer that process a little bit if it becomes problematic. Yeah.
Nice, nice, nice. Man, uh, I enjoy this so much. I enjoy this so much. I learned a lot, man. Like, like, yeah, I can't explain. Like this gut thing, this ISA thing bothers me for like at least for like 3 months. And I was, oh yeah, okay, okay.
Yeah, that's great, man. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You social media, right? You gotta be careful on social media because it's like a weird game of telephone.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. So it's like when you think about just conceptually, like you have a model of movement that this is the model. And then you have people who are like taking bits and pieces of the model and diluting it. So now you're like further away from the original. And now you have people arguing about the thing that's further away from the original. It just like it gets very convoluted very quickly and people aren't talking all about the same things and like all this stuff. So it's confusing. It's like, I talk about it in my content a lot. Like good luck figuring stuff out from Instagram and YouTube. Like it's going to be hard, right?
yeah,
It is like there's no way around it. It's hard for you, it's hard for me, it's hard for anyone because we got to appreciate the original starting point, right? And like I said before, the thing I personally think works best is like here's what I currently know. Here is this new information. Like, how do I make sense of it? Does it fit in what I think? Does it not fit? Like, what if this is completely wrong? What if I'm completely wrong? Like, we just ask ourselves those questions and we can figure out a lot of stuff.
nice, nice,
Yeah.
nice. All right. So for those who are interested in what we're talking about today, and uh, you post a lot of great content on your Instagram. Where can they find that?
Yeah, I have no idea what my Instagram is. I believe it's oh, I have it here. Wait. It's Dr. Shaun Astorga. Dr. Shaun Shaun Astorga is my Instagram. On there you'll see I answer all my DMs. That's all me. You'll see all our content. I'm always open to have conversations like this, answer any questions if it's within something I'm knowledgeable about. That's definitely the best place to find me. Yeah.
Nice, nice.